Russia has launched a series of airstrikes aimed at combating armed militants in Syria, shortly after the upper house of the Russian parliament gave President Vladimir Putin the mandate to use military force in the Arab country, which is an ally of Moscow. It seems that Washington has been taken by surprise by Russia's commitment to strike areas controlled by militants who are fighting against Assad. Western nations have already expressed concerns over Russia's efforts against the militants, many of whom have been funded and armed by the West.
The United States has expressed concern over Russia's moves to help oppose the foreign-backed militancy in Syria. Moscow says its military moves are to fight the militant ISIL or DAESH movement, which has seized large areas of the country. But Russia's commitment to the Syrian government conflicts with US policy to oust President Assad. At the same time, Washington is considering a revision of its efforts to train militants in Syria to fight Daesh, essentially to prevent its program from totally collapsing. Adding to the confusion, the Wall Street Journal claims the Pentagon is considering replacing the $500 million train and equip program with a more modest effort. Why is Russia getting involved with Syria? For what reason has the US become concerned about Russia's involvement? And who caused the instabilities in the Middle East in the first place? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. It is no secret that Russia has deployed tactical military equipment and troops to Syria, and this has taken the US by surprise. Is the American public surprised? We asked them.
Nothing Russia really does surprises me, so I'm not surprised that they went to Syria, but I think it could be good. I don't know.
No. Why should I be surprised that Russia has a right to do what they want?
No. Why should I be surprised?
No, I'm not really surprised, considering the fact that you have a conflict going on, and when everybody's ganging up, people are ganging up against a common enemy, they're going to take any kind of resources or any kind of ways they can to take that enemy down. And the U.S. has made a lot of enemies, especially in that area, so it's not a big surprise over here.
I knew that Putin and Assad had some sort of relationships, so I'm not shocked. But I think that's increasing tensions on already problematic front.
No. Countries commit troops and do different things internationally. We do it all the time. We should expect it of others.
I have no clue about this at all.
I'm not surprised at all. Russia, does everything at once and always as a surprise. But I'm not surprised.
To be honest, nobody's helping Syria, so somebody's got to make the move, right? So I'm not surprised. I'm actually happy that someone is helping them.
I'm not terribly surprised at all. It's from what we've seen from the news, Russia is really looking to make itself a geopolitical force again, and this would be right in line. It also gives them a lot of political leverage.
What do our experts make of the fact that America seems surprised by Russia's deployment of tactical military equipment and troops in Syria?
No. I think it's a continuation of Russia's involvement in Syria. If you look at the equipment Russia's deployed now, it's 24 fighter jets, half a dozen tanks, and a dozen helicopter gunships. So it is significant in the sense of the timing, but if you zoom out and look at Russia's involvement, it predates this conflict, and you can see that Russia has a significant interest in Syria. Syria has been Russia's client for about 50 years now.
I'm surprised that America is surprised by the Russian arms arriving in western Syria, because Russia, from the onset of this conflict, of this civil war, has been providing military support to the Assad government. So it's a bit rich of America to start screaming suddenly that Russia is getting involved in this civil war in Syria, when it's just basically, in a sense, a routine development where troops, so-called troops, are there as technicians, advisors, who are helping to arrange for this equipment to be brought in, utilized and used. So we are not talking about ground troops.
What do you think is behind Russia's efforts in Syria? That's what we asked the American public.
I mean, I think that's a bit of a complicated question. I think, like, obviously there are ulterior motives, but I mean, in Syria right now, like, innocent civilians are getting killed all the time. So, I mean, when they deploy troops, who are the troops for, is my question.
I think they're trying to get as much allies as they can, so they want to get Syria on their side, and at the same time, they don't want America to interfere, because we know that they don't want Americans to have any influence on any other of these countries, because Syria right now is like the only country that's standing in the middle, whether it should be on the allies or, yeah.
I think they probably have alternative motives. I mean, I think it's good that they want to help Syria, but possibly that, you know, they just want the rest of the world to make them look like they're doing something good.
Maybe they want to be before than America.
I can't help but think that it's a money thing and a thing of profit, and when you follow the money, it comes down to oil. So they wouldn't, I don't think as a world power, they would do anything without gaining anything out of it.
It's given Russia in general, and Vladimir Putin in particular, a chance to reestablish Russia as a major geopolitical force, and maybe with Iran, which is a big client, to let them have leadership control over the Middle East ahead of the United States, trying to steal a vacuum which they feel has been created.
I believe they're supplying them with arms, though I don't know the specifics, honestly, but I think that's the nature of the relationship.
Probably because of all the terrorist groups like ISIS and other things like that, wouldn't you be? I don't think we're doing enough in this country, to be honest with you.
Russia is carving out its influence around the world the way China is, the way the US has for many decades, and hopefully are still doing in some benevolent, awesome way. But yeah, so that's it.
We invited our experts to explain why Russia has intervened in Syria.
Syria is Russia's client. It has been a client of Russia since the 1970s. And it looks at Syria, Russia looks at Syria as a significant asset, and it would not like to lose it. Also, if the Syrian state were to fall apart, Russia sees the alternative as Afghanistan in the 1980s. So Russia would like to preserve its client and also prevent extremists from taking over Syria.
Well, Russia basically from the start of the conflict in Syria was saying that it's not a good time to change regimes in Syria simply because America and some other countries like Saudi Arabia want that. Because if it happens, we have an example of Libya, where the regime change brought in total chaos, where now the country is a failed state, there is no government, it's under the control of different terrorist groups. So if Russia's thinking was, if Assad goes, there is no replacement for him, the country will disintegrate. Nobody was insisting on the Russian side that Assad should stay forever, but temporarily during this crisis, especially now, as this new threat of the so-called DAESH terrorist group is so obvious, that a change of government would be disastrous.
Washington has expressed concern over Russia's moves to support the government of Bashar al-Assad against foreign-backed militants in Syria. Why is this? We asked the American public.
Well, to be honest with you, I really don't know why they're concerned, but I could say that they're probably concerned because they're afraid of what this could mean for us, because you know, what's going on in Syria right now is pretty dangerous. You know, I have friends who actually live there and they tell me what's going on a daily basis. So I would imagine that they don't want Russia interfering because, you know, Russia is its own superpower, and, you know, if Russia gets involved, then now we have to deal with another situation. So I think that's the concern, that, you know, Russia might actually, you know, help make the situation a little worse too, because they're giving them weapons and stuff like that.
Because the United States has been allied with Assad, whether it's liked it or not, and all they're doing is they're giving him, by supporting him to help suppress ISIS, a war which he probably helped himself foment to suppress rebels, people who are against him. it keeps them tied to him in a big way. And of course, they would rather see a democracy. This just further delays or prevents it from ever happening.
Something to do. Yeah, because they think that they have every right just to police the world, and everything that they say is right or wrong, and no one has a right to be able to do whatever they want to. It's just typical U.S. stuff.
Because we're on the other side of that.
I think they're concerned because that's just more enemies on the list, and that's just more coming up against them. I think anything that would cause a loss would cause a concern to any world power or anybody in a position of power.
I could not tell you that. Got nothing.
Our experts clarified America's worries about Russian support for Bashar al-Assad's efforts against foreign-backed militants in Syria.
I think it's outwardly concerned, certainly. It's because its stated position is that it would like to enter a civil war and fight against the government and the rebels. So its outward stated position is that it would like to displace Assad and overthrow and destroy ISIS, which is kind of impossible. But inwardly, I believe they're quite pleased that Russia is coming in to support, to buttress their effort against ISIS, if indeed Russia is fighting against ISIS. What they don't want Russia to do is shore up Assad. But without Assad, you create a vacuum.
Well, first of all, the US has no proper policy in the Middle East. I would say that the Obama administration is totally confused. I think that they don't really understand what they are doing. And I think the meeting that President Putin had with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Israeli side did express certain concerns of what's going on. They didn't actually accuse America of causing problems for it, but they do realize that the developments in the region are very dangerous for them. They do realize that they need stability to survive. And unfortunately, the American government, and my personal opinion, is that America is the #1 enemy of Israel, not Iran or Hezbollah or anything. Because the Americans create these conditions which are creating stability around Israel. So I would think that Americans really need to think hard what is their policy towards Syria and Iraq. And at the moment, I don't see a policy. There was a secret meeting not long ago between a high-ranking CIA delegation that arrived in secret in Moscow and met with Russian foreign intelligence officials. And during that meeting, the Russian officials didn't understand what is exactly the policy of America in Syria, in Iraq, and in other places. What is it they are trying to achieve? Because one day they say one thing, the next day they say another thing. We've heard them say Assad must go at once. Now they're saying, well, maybe not at once, but at some point. So I think there's total confusion in Washington, and that creates even more uncertainty and instability all across the region.
Why is there a growing mood that the only nations actually doing anything to defeat ISIL are Russia, Iran, and Syria itself? We asked the American public.
Probably because it's convenient for them, because it's in their backyard. Yeah. We're pretty far from that particular area.
I think that other nations are just kind of scared of what can happen. When you're working with terrorists or not working with terrorists, a lot of repercussions could happen down the road. So, I think that everyone needs to be careful.
Maybe they don't have any self-interest in the situation. The problem with ISIS is that is the most, they're the most financially secure terrorist organization ever. And that's a huge problem with ISIS.
Everybody should be against any kind of terrorist organization, anything that would be considered a threat worldwide. Everyone should be involved. So anybody that's feeling skeptical to go against a terrorist organization would cause a concern.
Well, I don't know how much I truly think that's correct. I believe the French are actually involved in bombing strikes that started again recently. So I don't know if I agree with that totally.
But that's actually kind of, that's surprising to me. I mean, I thought America was fighting ISIL. And if that's a growing mood, then that says something about us, and that should be something that should be addressed. Because, there's also those people saying that, it's something that's probably created by our government or whatever it is, Can't really say if that's true or not, but if that's the growing mood, then I just hope America steps up and fights ISIL, because not only is ISIL a big threat to America, but it's also a threat to young kids who are easily influenced and might think that this is the right way to go as, growing up as a Muslim or whatever religion they want to follow. So, I hope more people fight ISIL. I'm disappointed, to be honest, that that's the growing mood.
The Kurds even are very active. Kurds living in Germany go back home to fight. And no, I don't think that's right.
Unfortunately, that seems to be the case. From what we understand, some of us in America, for those of us shows like Real Time with Bill Maher and some other shows like on CNN and the like, we know that certain countries like Saudi Arabia spend a lot of money on their military and could, if they really wanted to, step up their own efforts, but they don't seem to want to. Or they're looking for an opportunity of some sort. Because why do it if someone else will do the work for them?
We invited our experts to consider why Russia, Iran and Syria seem to be the key nations engaged with defeating ISIL.
Because Iran certainly has the most to lose if ISIS were to come to power, because Iran is a Shia state and ISIS is a Sunni extremist group. And Russia has an interest in preventing the rise of ISIS because it has a client. It has a client-master relationship with Syria. And this coalition, as it were, has sort of fortified over the years. It didn't begin like that, but over the years it has strengthened.
Well, first of all, in my opinion, President Assad and his army are probably the only force in Syria that are really fighting those terrorists, those guns for hire. I never could understand that, that name, Islamic State. They're not Muslims, they are not a state. These are guns for hire. They are doing it for money. So President Assad and his army are technically the only viable force in Syria that is fighting them. But of course Iran and Russia are helping. If Iran and Russia didn't help, I think Syria would have disintegrated a long time ago. I think we would have seen a situation in Syria now which would have threatened not only the immediate neighbors, and including Israel as well, which would have threatened the whole region. We would have been looking at the possibility of a regional war in the Middle East.
Is it time for the US to admit it caused the instabilities in the Middle East and to stop its polemics about Russia and Iran? Here's what the US public thought.
That's hard to say. It's hard to say right now. I think it's a little too early, but I think that a lot of the neighboring countries like in Saudi Arabia and Lebanon and all of the other predominantly Muslim countries should probably take more extreme measures to try to surround these terrorist groups and put them in prison, because it is a really big problem, mostly for them.
They accuse them, everybody around there accuses them anyway. So why should America say, oh yeah, here we are? No. I think they shouldn't.
I think that the U.S. needs to take some ownership of the whole situation, yes. I don't think that we need to admit that everything's our fault, but I definitely think that ownership should be taken.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no more to that answer.
Well, certainly, there's a huge amount of responsibility the U.S. has for what's happened in the Middle East. Certainly, the Iraq part of ISIS we can take full responsibility for, in my opinion. As far as the destabilization of Syria, that's more than I can really speak to.
The U.S. is one of many interests and agencies and vectors into the problems of the Middle East. So the U.S. is in no different than any other country in being involved in that place.
I think, definitely America has had some some influences in the Middle East that have caused them to break down and dismantle and implode in a way. But at the same time, it's the people there too, you know, like, I mean, you know, I come from an Arab background, so I know how Arabs are sometimes, and something that could be said about them is that, you know, they have a hard time getting together and unifying and helping one another, and seeing, you know, and they always have this status thing, seeing some lower than they are or whatever. If they could just equalize themselves and help each other out, no one can bring them down. So in all reality, there's no one to blame but ourselves. You know, if we were helping one another and helping each other, no one could bring us down.
I think the U.S. certainly has had a hand in it. I don't think there's much denying that now. You go from 1952 with backing the Shah of Iran and a variety of other causes. Are they completely at fault? Probably not. But are they largely at fault? Probably yes.
Should the US admit it was responsible for instabilities in the Middle East instead of preaching about Russia and Iran? We gave the final word to our experts.
There's a line in V.S. Naipaul's novel A Bend in the River where the narrator says the Europeans wanted golden slaves like everyone else, but they also wanted statues put to themselves as people who had done good things for the slaves. America likes to intervene in other people's affairs, but it also wants to be thought of as doing good things for the countries it's intervening in. Its credibility is seriously tainted by its catastrophic war in Iraq, and the crisis today of ISIS is a consequence of that intervention. So when America lectures Russia or the world, it doesn't have the credibility it used to have because of Iraq.
It's high time for the Obama administration to understand that they are playing a dangerous game. It is high time for Washington to stop meddling in an aggressive way in the Middle East and in Syria especially. I think it is high time for the United Nations, which I personally think is a completely morally bankrupt organization because it did nothing to prevent the slaughter either in Libya or in Syria and so on. It is time to create an international mechanism that would help sort out crises like that, like the one in Syria at the moment, and that probably it will develop into more situations across the region. But for America, they really, really need to sit down or actually step aside and think what they are doing. They are creating conditions for a regional war that can actually blow into a world war if they are not careful.
America is taking a strong stand against Russia's involvement in Syrian politics. Yet, by any objective analysis, Russia is a significant global player in the urgent search for peace and stability in the Middle East. To put it another way, Moscow is willing to make serious moves to deliver sustainable solutions to the mess which the US created. It seems that when faced with the prospect of a Russian-backed solution, the US would rather have no solution at all.